Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. First of all, I would like to thank the European Union for supporting the monograph project within which this research is being developed. In this paper, I present one component of the monograph project, a model for searching early Croatian Latin script printed books that operationalizes the concept of the Graphematic solution space, or GSS, at the level of individual books rather than at the level of an entire written language. The broader goal behind this work is the gradual construction of a historical corpus of Croatian, which we still do not really have in a usable, searchable form. My point of departure is Martin Neff's modular theory of phonographic writing systems. But my main claim is that for early Croatian print and for retrieval purposes, book-level modeling is not simply more practical, it is also theoretically better motivated. Is that fine? If we want to search historical text without lemmatization, without phonetic transcription, and without a heavy NLP pipeline, we need to model graphematic regularities locally at the level of the artifact. I should also add that I'm not technically trained in any strong sense. My background is deeply philological, and this work has grown largely out of a sheer necessity. Let me state the argument as directly as possible. I begin from Neff's distinction between structurally licensed spellings and their later orthographic restriction, but I shift the model from recoding to retrieval, which will be explained. So the question is no longer how a spelling maps onto phonology, but how a modern user query can be expanded into historically licensed variants for search. My central claim is that this only works well if the graphematic configuration is modeled at the level of the individual book. The theoretical framework comes from Martin Neff's modular model of phonographic writing systems. In that model, Graphematics defines the set of structurally licensed spellings for a given phonological representation. While systematic orthography acts as a further module that conventionally restricts this space. The graphematic solution space, then, is the total set of spellings that are graphotactically permissible, regardless of whether they are later selected by orthography as the correct conventional form. This distinction is crucial because it allows us to separate structural possibility from normative regulation. That distinction is the point I want to preserve. What I change is not the idea of a licensed graphematic space, but the direction in which it is operationalized. Before turning to my own model, it helps to look at one compact example from Neff. For the German phonological representation shown on the slide, this wall. Graphematics license is not just one possible spelling, but the whole range of graphematically sensible spellings, as you can see. Neff's point is that graphematics defines a space of license possibilities, whereas systematic orthography later restricts that space by assigning one conventional spelling to a particular lexical item. This is exactly the distinction I want to preserve. Not every licensed form is selected, but the licensed space has to be modeled first. My model departs from Neff primarily in direction. Neff's model is concentrated with recoding, that is, with the relation from spelling to phonological representation. My model starts from the other side. The user enters a query in contemporary standard orthography. And the system expands that query into historically licensed spelling variants, which are then matched against the corpus. So this is not a recoding model in the strict sense. It is a retrieval-oriented operationalization of the graphematic model. In that sense, I remain close to Neff's idea that there is a space of possible spellings, but I operationalize that space for search rather than for recoding as such. This immediately raises the question of scale. At what level should such a space be modeled? One obvious possibility would be to construct a single general graphematic configuration for all early Croatian Latin script books. in some ways, that would indeed bring the model closer to NAV system level perspective. But for retrieval, this creates a serious problem. Global configuration would have to include historically relevant variants from different books, printing shops, regions, and traditions. As a result, it would license many spellings that are theoretically possible somewhere in the broader tradition, but are not actually used in the individual volume we are searching. The search space would therefore become too permissive, and retrieval precision would suffer. So the issue is not simply that the global model gives us more hits. It gives us a weaker account of what is locally possible in a given artifact. By contrast, a book-level configuration remains tied to attested local regularities, preserves stronger constraints instead of weak tendencies, and aligns formalization with the artifact actually being queried. At the level of an individual book, we can formulate strong local constraints. For example, in one particular volume, modern page retrieves historical sequence of letters PECH, while Pechi retrieves sequences of letters PCHI. When representing the sound ch, the sequence CHI is not licensed word final, but otherwise it is licensed. This is extremely useful for retrieval because it reduces false positives. But the moment we move to a global model, such constraints tend to collapse. If another book in the broader tradition does allow this word finally with the same value, then we can no longer say this never happens. We can only say this is less typical. In other words, book-level modeling allows strong constraints, whereas global modeling often reduces them to weak tendencies. For a retrieval model, that difference is fundamental. Let me now show how this works operationally. The workflow consists of a small number of clearly separated steps. First, the book is digitized and processed with OCR. Second, the OCR output is manually verified in order to minimize recognition noise. Third, the spelling practices of that individual book are analyzed philologically. On that basis, book-specific rules are formulated, and in my implementation, they are materialized mainly as regular expressions derived from those rules. When a user submits a query in contemporary standard orthography, those rules generate historically licensed spelling variants, which are then matched against the plain text corpus. The corpus itself remains in the original Latin script spellings, including errors present in the original print. It is not globally normalized in advance. OCR correction and graphematic modeling are treated as two distinct stages rather than being collapsed into one procedure. At this point, it is important to clarify what kind of normalized input the model actually uses. In principle, one might think that if we adapted NAF more closely, we should start from a genuine phonological representation. But for retrieval, that would not actually solve the practical problem I'm dealing with. What the user enters is not a phonological representation in the strict sense, but a contemporary orthographic query. In Croatian, this is a workable starting point because the present-day writing system is relatively shallow. And because the phoneme inventory from the beginnings of printing to the present is still broadly comparable. That is why a modern query can function as a practical pivot for retrieval. It does not transparently reproduce older phonology, but it gives us a stable user-facing entry point from which book-specific graphematic rules can generate historically licensed spellings. Here, however, I want to be very precise, and this is where I need to make an important clarification. The system does not infer historical spellings automatically from a modern form. It only returns variants that have been explicitly licensed for that particular book. The model should therefore not be understood as deriving Srpski with a B from the modern query Srpski as a with a P as a generally valid historical equivalent. The spelling Srpski with B is morphologically motivated. B does not function here as a graphematic realization of P. This of phoneme phi. P. This correspondence is therefore inaccessible to the model by design. The primary intended user is someone with a basic awareness of historical and dialectal variation who recognizes such cases and, when necessary, submits two separate queries to retrieve all relevant occurrences from the corpus. In early modern English print, for example, modern spelling already covers much of what one encounters in early books. So this kind of model would bring limited practical benefit. In Croatian, the situation is different. The gap between early Latin script print and the present-day standard is much wider, and that makes graphematic expansion worth modeling. From a practical point of view, the modern user simply cannot use early Croatian print as a searchable resource without mediation. This also means that the model is deliberately limited in certain ways. It does not introduce phonetic transcription, it does not lemmatize the text, it does not add morphological annotation, and it does not attempt to construct a full historical to modern normalization pipeline of the kind often used in historical NLP. Phonological considerations enter only indirectly, insofar as they motivate graphemic correspondences between historical and contemporary spellings. But the retrieval process itself does not pass through a phonological layer. This is also what distinguishes the model from the dominant computational approaches to historical spelling. Most existing approaches proceed from historical forms to modern ones. The aim is usually to prepare the text for downstream NLP tasks such as lemmatization, tagging, or other forms of linguistic enrichment. My model works in the opposite direction. It starts from the modern query and expands it into historically licensed book-specific variants. The goal is not global normalization of the corpus, the goal is retrieval within the graphematic profile of a particular artifact. In the monograph project, one might say that the corpus is normalized on demand, and only during the search process, while remaining in its original graphic state underneath. One major advantage of the approach is philological transparency. The rules are explicit, inspectable, and revisable. A philologist can see why a contemporary form has been expanded into a particular set of historical candidates and can revise those rules if necessary. In that sense, the model remains executable without becoming opaque. From a disciplinary perspective, this matters a great deal, because philological expertise is not an afterthought here, it is built directly into the formal model. More broadly, the project stands at the intersection of grapholinguistics and digital philology. From grapholinguistics, it takes the idea of a structured space of licensed spellings. From digital philology, it takes the commitment to artifact-based analysis, explicit editorial control, and inspectable procedures. At the same time, such a model also has its cost. And that cost is best discussed under the heading of overgeneration. When a user enters a modern form, the system will often generate more historical candidates than are actually attested in the book. But in this framework, this is not simply a defect. It is actually an expected consequence of the very idea of graphematic solution space. So the real question is not whether overgeneration can be eliminated entirely. The real question is whether it can be constrained sufficiently by philologically motivated book-specific rules. And once again, this is where the book-level approach proves crucial. Just as importantly, the model lowers the threshold for use. Users do not need detailed prior knowledge of each source's spelling system in order to search it productively. They need only the degree of historical and dialectal awareness that can reasonably be expected of an educated user of Croatian historical materials. In other words, even a reasonably attentive Croatian language student who has occasionally paid attention in class should be able to use it. The whole idea is especially important in the Croatian case. Early Croatian print is a particularly instructive test case. The Croatian written tradition is shaped by the coexistence of three scripts: Glagolitic, Latin, and Croatian Cyrillic. With the current resources of the project, Latin script books are the most realistic starting point because they are easier to digitize reliably. While their graphematic variation is itself especially complex and challenging, while still reflecting the same language. Early modern printed books also operated without a stable codified orthography. What we find instead are locally coherent but variable spelling systems. That is precisely why a single global model becomes either too broad or too coarse. A book-level approach is much better suited to capturing this local coherence without erasing variation. I see four main contributions here. First, the paper reinterprets the notion of graphematic solution space in retrieval-oriented terms. Second, it introduces book-level graphematic configurations as an operational model for historical corpora. Third, it encodes philological decisions in explicit and revisable formal rules. And fourth, it clearly separates OCR correction from graphematic modeling. More broadly, within the monograph project, this is a fast and realistic route toward the searchable historical corpus of Croatian. Not yet the whole destination, but a major move away from a slow, isolated philological editing toward reusable digital infrastructure. If I had to reduce the whole argument to a single sentence, it would be this. Book-level modeling is not just more practical, it is what makes strong graphematic constraints and precise retrieval possible. In that sense, moving away from a single maximal global graphematic solution space is not a weakness of the model. It is its main theoretical and methodological gain. And more broadly, entanglement here is not merely the coexistence of disciplines. Graphematic theory, philological interpretation, and computational formalization constrain and reshape one another. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah. So I have to say I have no idea about Croatian. I've thought a lot about Neve though, and the idea of the graphematic solution space, and what went through my mind when listening to the book level approach was how hard it would be to determine the graphematic constraints for each book individually, I guess. So even if there is strong local coherence of graphematic rules, in the end, I guess you would only be able to know whether a certain book has a certain set of graphematic rules after you have analyzed the whole book, essentially. Wouldn't that cause as much work as normalization?
Actually, my point is no. But you have to have a certain philological experience to know that is true, because before this I was working on text editing of this old lectionaries and biblical text and so on, and this was all aimed to was a work that was supposed to do exactly the same thing but from the other side. This whole thing, of course, collapsed because there was only three of us, and the publishing of only one work takes years. Of only one book, or call it whatever, of only one artifact. It just takes you years. And during realizing this, I started to think about the easier way to do this. So this what I'm proposing is also quite time consuming, but also I think it will be very rewarding because the publishing process is much faster, and in this particular case I'm the only one who is actually doing the digitization. So after I amend all the OCR mistakes, I actually know everything there is to know about the books. So in the next step, I'm only testing my hypothesis by in a program such as AntConc or something like that. It is very easy for me to see general rules. Sometimes I get surprised that there is something underneath which I cannot really quite define during this first part of the work, but then when I see it like that, crystal clear, then it is all clear. That's what I want to say. But there is one thing also here present. These orthographies in different artifacts, they are different, but essentially they are not that different. They are only variations of the same. And when I describe enough of these irregularities, they will begin to repeat itself. So essentially, I will only click, I have this in this book, and then that all rules will be there, but these sets work for this particular book. So when I reach some substantial number of books, this work will be actually doing itself, and not to mention the artificial intelligence potential. I hope that answers your question.
Actually, just the point that it's a single philologist doing the digitalization and then the determination. That already explains that makes it seem much more feasible.
Thanks.
Can you talk more about your corpus and the books that you're working with? I think you talked about the start point this time.
Yes, no, I didn't talk about it because I actually had in mind a listener who doesn't know anything about creation. But so it is not an elitistic a list of books. It is virtually anything that I can find online. That is so. My project is designed to be very simple in every aspect of work. So, for example, if I have some slight problem of encoding a character, I cannot find in a Unicode table provided by the Microsoft Word or something like that. If it is not high enough on that table, actually, if it gets far away from the keyboard, from what you can find on the keyboard, it's already kind of troubling me. So, because I wanted this to be reusable, like in 100 years, if possible. So I could talk about that for hours, but I think that you realize what I'm getting at here.
you see as far as which script people are going to default on as time goes by, and for Croatia and the other countries that used to be a part of Yugoslavia? Is everybody heading towards the Latin script, or do you think it will be more of a dual solution into the future?
Well, for Croatia, there's no. It's just Latin. But we had Cyrillic script historically, but it is trivial to convert Latin script, Croatian Latin script to Serbian Cyrillic script. It's really one-on-one relation, more or less.
Can we just talk sometime about OCR for old stuff after this? I would like to do that.
Okay.
Very much.
Thank you.